This week in the enterprise security news, MITRE ATT&CK for ICS, a technical deep dive. Tufin expands security automation capabilities. Strengthen business and security alignment with ThreatConnect. BeyondTrust Privilege Management for Windows and Mac gets an update. Re-imaging threat detection, hunting and response with CTI, and more. We then interview Adam Bazian, Executive Vice President of Global Business Development at CyberX, to discuss what is the real value of identity in a multi-vendor IT environment. In the final segment, we welcome Zach Moody, Head of Global Security and Privacy at AVX Corporation, to talk about how cybersecurity is a mindset that cannot be taught. So stay tuned for all that and more on this episode of Enterprise Security Weekly. This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where we talk security vendors and aren't afraid to name names. It's Enterprise Security Weekly. The Viavi Solutions Observer Platform provides SecOps teams a powerful combination of comprehensive data for threat hunting and incident response that includes wire data analytics and enriched flow records. Using pure, unaltered packet and net flow, Observer presents views across the entire IT infrastructure with threat alert features including scope, impact, and advanced traffic profiling. Teams can use automated workflows to dive into high-fidelity network evidence and more quickly resolve issues, minimizing impact on customers, users, and business operations. Learn more about the Viavi Network Security Solution and download free resources at securityweekly.com/Viavi. That's VIAVI. You want to get the right things done for your security program. Sounds simple, but what are the right things for you? What does done mean? And how are you going to get there? Rapid7 realizes more than anyone how hard this can be. While Rapid7's Insight platform offers you industry-leading vulnerability management and detection and response solutions, their focus is on understanding where you are so that they can help you get where you're going. Visit securityweekly.com/Rapid7 to get started. Welcome to episode 185 of Enterprise Security Weekly for May 27th, 2020. I'm your host, Paul Asadorian, joined remotely by Mr. John Strand. John, welcome.
Thank you for having me on. Paul, by the way, I love the new Darth Vader sticker.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it's a whole laptop kind of skin thing. Rather than stickering the whole thing up, I decided to go with a skin just to be different.
Nice.
Mr. Matt Alderman is here with us. Matt, welcome.
And talking about different, it's Wednesday, and this is the first podcast of the week. By now, it's usually the fourth podcast of the week.
Yes.
I don't know how you guys do it. I don't
do a lot of podcasts.
Yes.
A lot of podcasts. It's good stuff. Quick announcement before we get started. Join us at InfoSec World, the virtual conference, June 22nd through the 24th even. Security Weekly listeners save 15% off the InfoSec Conference World Pass or main conference, securityweekly.com/ISW 2020. You can use our discount code. Also, don't forget to join our mailing list and receive our invite to our community Discord server by visiting securityweekly.com/subscribe. And now into the news. Where'd you guys want to start with the news?
I say we jump in with CyberX.
Yes, CyberX. This was the deep dive, right?
Mm-hmm.
I like to highlight
the ICS one.
Yeah, I like to highlight the deep dives, except you have to register for this one, which is kind of interesting. But I do like vendors that are supplying technical information.
I like the idea of it being tied to MITRE ATT&CK and kind of developing it specifically for ICS, but there's been this really disturbing trend with MITRE ATT&CK framework, and it's not really the fault of MITRE at all. It's basically a ton of vendors, and I'm not accusing CyberX of doing this, but a ton of vendors are using the MITRE ATT&CK technique matrix as a signature database and making sure that their products can detect all of the different techniques that are referenced there. And it's really, really a problem in the industry because those techniques are representative examples of a technique. And most vendors, they just get that coverage for that specific technique base, and then they don't really go any deeper than that. So I would encourage anybody, whenever you're looking at evaluating a product or a vendor specifically for anything associated with MITRE ATT&CK, don't take their word for face value that they have 80% coverage of the technique matrix, because most of them are lying, and they're just writing signatures for the examples, not the actual full techniques themselves.
It's funny, Paul, you and I just had a conversation on this yesterday about how to appropriately kind of research and test out both offensive and defensive solutions. And what John's saying is very interesting, because we were talking about some of the caveats of, if you only test against the MITRE ATT&CK framework techniques, you may not cover all of those techniques. They're kind of writing towards those specific attacks, and you may be missing a whole bunch of stuff.
Yeah, and some of the techniques in MITRE ATT&CK are very generic and can take on many different forms, right? And so, like, you can say that, yeah, we test for that, but the devil's in some of the details behind many of those different techniques.
Yeah. Like, one of the examples would be just PowerShell execution.
Yeah.
If somebody's like, well, the attackers use PowerShell. Okay, we can detect anytime anyone uses PowerShell. Great. Well, what happens if they rename it? What happens if they upload and run an older version of PowerShell? There's a number of different ways, or they just do raw C# access through an application, bypassing PowerShell completely. So there's a lot of ways that you have to look at these. And I think it's great that it got people at least thinking and looking at the attacks. But like I said, a bunch of people are like, this is it. This is the whole universe. We detect all this. We're good, right? And that's absolutely not true.
So what you're saying is we need a matrix within the matrix, right?
We need a matrix within the matrix. Absolutely.
Yeah. I agree. Well, that's a lot of work to put. A lot of work.
It becomes a cube.
Yeah.
No longer 2D,
becomes a
it's now
cube.
3D.
Yeah. I mean, it's a lot of work to put all that together and maintain it. I think MITRE's doing a great job of some of the higher level techniques, right? But like John pointed out, there's different techniques within the techniques, and those are always changing. And good that people are thinking about PowerShell, right? But just because in one particular scenario you detected it doesn't mean you're always going to detect it.
Now, do you guys think that this ties into the Kenna article? Like, I don't know what they're doing. I don't know what they're doing here. Sorry, I should let Paul or you guys describe the article.
No, that's okay. Yeah, I mean, Kenna's doing some cool stuff. I mean, we had them on late last year, and I was super impressed with the way they took in your data and analyzed your data. I think their algorithms are pretty sound. I mean, Matt and I were on that interview, and we both have worked in vulnerability management for a long time. We were like, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, and they released that as kind of a free tool to do exploit prediction based on that data, which I think is interesting, right? They're looking at what's the probability that a vulnerability is going to get exploited. They use that as part of their prioritization in their solution, which I think is good. What this announcement is, I think this is a shot at Tenable's Lumen, which is more around benchmarking yourself to other people's vulnerability management programs. Now, to get the value out of something like a Tenable Lumen, you need to be a customer, and then you get to see supposedly these different benchmarks across different industries. What Kenna did is said, look, we did the research. We created a free tool. You answer these 9 questions, and we'll give you the benchmarking information for free. And then you can decide how you want to move forward. So it's an interesting announcement here, because I really think they're going after Tenable specifically with this one.
So a couple of things then about this, because I thought this was a great tool. I thought this was a tool that would go through and check, vulnerabilities and what's in your environment. And okay, so the problem I have with this, whenever you're talking about market verticals, right? Everybody talks about, well, what are the vulnerabilities that are being exploited in finance? What are the vulnerabilities that are being exploited in retail? And what are the vulnerabilities that are being exploited in like higher education? And that whole entire conversation is garbage, from the top all the way down to the bottom. It's garbage because we believe as human beings that the same attack that hit somebody else in the market vertical is going to hit me. And that's not necessarily true. It may be, but with an attacker, they're going to use the vulnerability that works to gain access to your organization. So that's number one. Number two, like based on something Matt said a couple of weeks ago, similar to this, I started going through a bunch of previous pen test reports at BHIS, and I basically started collecting the data of what vulnerabilities we were discovering by size of organization and market vertical. And there was absolutely no solid consistency of a certain market vertical has a certain type of vulnerability versus another one. It was basically a very even spread of vulnerabilities across the entire base of all of our customers. So I think that people gravitate to this as an idea if they have no idea at all what they're actually talking about. that they can somehow, well, we're in retail. We want to know what other people are doing in retail. That's not the way you lead. That's not the way you run a security program. So I have some problems with this whole entire methodology of I want to know what's happening within my market vertical because it's a trap. And the attackers are going to use whatever they can to get into your organization.
Yeah, I think it's a data point, and it speaks to likelihood, right? So if maybe I'm not prepared for some of those attacks, I could be in trouble, but you have to treat it as a data point, right? You can't give it as high a priority as I think people give it, with different ISACs, right? Just because a group targeted one financial company that way doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be targeted in the same way. Likely, yes. You might be, right? So you should be prepared for it, but too high a priority. I agree, John.
I think what you use it for, to use it successfully, is you use it to drive home narratives to get management on board with what you're going to do. Because if you say, hey, we've got these vulnerabilities, we need to fix them, they don't care. But if you say one of our competitors got hit by this exact same vulnerability that we have and we need to address it, now there's a connective tissue, there's a narrative, it makes it somehow more visceral. Because Paul, we've talked about this in the past. If we go into an educational organization and we start talking about attacks that worked in banks, executives stop listening to us. But if we go into a bank and we talk about attacks that work in banks, well, they're all ears. So I think it's more of a political way of addressing vulnerabilities than in having any real efficacy in relation to actually securing an organization.
My only concern is there is a downside to this as well, which is if you look at your peers and you see their scores as low and you think you're more mature, you're going to say, well, I'm doing better than my peers and maybe I'm not going to invest anymore. So we got to be careful with some of these benchmarks because it can be used in the other direction as well, John.
Absolutely. I didn't even think about that, but you're absolutely right. Where all of a sudden your executives look at this and say, well, we've got, let's talk about critical security controls. We've got a score of 4.5. We're good on security. Now we can start pulling the budget back because our peers have a score of 3. So maybe a 3.75 is where we need to be.
Yeah. I mean, it's about closing down those exposures, right? Those could be patches. More than likely it's configuration in some capacity. And so, I looked at what all the other financial companies, how they're being attacked, and I closed some of those exposures down. So when an attacker comes along, they'll be like, oh, cool, you did some stuff in Active Directory to lock things down, but now I'm just going to use this other technique, right? I mean, that's literally what's happening, right? So I think understanding those attack paths, closing down as many as you can and prioritizing those is really where you should be focused, keeping in mind that, yes, how others are attacked does play into it, but it's not the end-all be-all, right?
Well, and I don't think that people give enough credit to the speed at which an attacker will alter their path.
Agreed.
Yeah. And prioritization is very company-specific. It has a lot to do with how you assign criticality to your assets and how you want to measure that. Granted, there might be some commonalities across industries, but it is very organizational specific, and broad scales like this could create some challenges when it really needs to be a little more customized on a company by company basis.
Where else do we want to go? Oh, I want to just mention a couple quick. Deepwatch appoints Corey Bosden as Chief Technology Officer. Congrats to Corey. Did I speak with Deepwatch yet? I don't think I have.
No, I don't think you have yet. No, yeah, they're the spin out from what the heck is it? GuidePoint.
Okay.
Yeah, GuidePoint. It's their MSSP service. So
gotcha.
Corey went over there to build out some advanced managed security services stuff. Good friend. I mean,
we both
Corey and I
Corey.
worked together since 2009 back in Qualys, and between Qualys, RSA, Tenable, we've been together a few places in the past.
What else did I want to just mention quick?
Akamai one was good. The in-browser detection of compromised scripts.
Yeah, this is really interesting. As I start peeling back the layers of JavaScript and what's happening in the browser, this is where a lot of it's at in terms of your web application and also what your browser is doing and how to protect it. Some really interesting things, and I thought Akamai, offering some threat detection in this arena was really good and kind of interesting.
And I really think that this is, we were talking about blind spots just a second ago. The browser is quickly becoming the new endpoint. If you're in the realm of doing offensive security, you're finding out that bypassing endpoint security products is exponentially more difficult than it was like even 5 years ago. But you can still convince a user to load in a malicious plugin into a browser. You can load in malicious scripts. You can do those types of things. So I think if somebody's listening to the show and you're looking for a way that you can break into the security industry with a new product or a service, a piece of advice is look at what Akamai is doing and start seriously thinking about how we can wrap more security and detective capabilities around the browser by hooking into it and watching what's going on. Because as we move to the cloud and bring your own device and all these different things, yeah, the browser is where it's at, folks. That's green fields for a lot of attackers, and I think it's a great opportunity for companies to start hooking more security into the browser itself.
And it's the space of bot detection, is really good, and really interesting because we quickly, I think, realized when Google came out with CAPTCHA and then reCAPTCHA that determining if it's a computer or a human and making them like do math or type the squiggly words is a horrible user experience. And where I've seen the industry, now Google included, we have a webcast coming up with them on this, is they're basically hooking into the browser via JavaScript and observing a whole bunch of things, then using machine learning to determine in the background, are you a user or you are a bot, right? And there's a ton of companies that do this. Shape Security, Akamai bought. Did Akamai buy Shape? There's this whole consolidation that's gone down. Distill got bought by Imperva, or there's a whole. We could create a whole matrix. Speaking of matrix, right, about what's happened in this space. But essentially, almost all of these companies, to my knowledge, migrated to, we're going to load some JavaScript in the browser, and that's how we're going to make the decision. Now, Google has an interesting perspective because, and they'll share the statistics on our webcast, the amount of web traffic that they can look at to feed their machine learning far surpasses anyone's else's capabilities. So their ability to train an ML model is really awesome because something like they have 9 properties that have over 1 billion users, or some, they'll present the statistics. It's amazing.
Yeah. Yep. And this one ties into the Source Defense announcement, the funding announcement from Source Defense, because they're doing something kind of similar, right? They're looking at the third-party plugins and the client side. Well, the client side's the browser, right? So, they're also looking at this extension of moving some of the web defenses down to the client side, and also looking at some of the third-party plugins that are being used specifically in JavaScript that could create some new vulnerabilities. So the Akamai announcement and what you're seeing from this funding announcement from Source Defense are very interesting on that kind of same vein.
Yep.
Yeah, and the web app testing is really awesome today. There's so much going on. And what I like about identifying in my web application, am I using a JavaScript library that's old, right? How do I identify that? There may not be any published vulnerabilities, and I think I talked about it last week. Like, I traced one down, and I was like, well, you're using this library. It doesn't have any published vulnerabilities, but it was kind of abandoned like 5 years ago, right? So there probably are vulnerabilities in there, but no one's really publishing them and fixing them because they've moved on to a different version, but you're using the 5-year-old library. If I can know that as a web developer, that's really great. I think some of the SCA probably does similar things. I mean, even back in the day, Matt, with VM, it was able to look at the site remotely and see which JavaScript libraries were vulnerable. Burp does some of that as well. But like PHP and WordPress plugins, there's so many different JavaScript libraries. Sorting it out, I think needs a commercial solution to be able to have a lab to identify those and be able to test for them.
Yeah, the open source tools do a good initial review, but I don't think they go deep enough to really find some of those deep underlying dependency vulnerabilities. That's where the commercial tools are going to come in.
Okay, so I would agree on the dependency vulnerabilities 110%, but whenever you're looking at common coding errors, the open source tools do a fantastic job for your standard coding errors. But whenever it gets into dependencies, you're 100% on point. They just don't.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
What else we got in here? BeyondTrust made an announcement. I haven't seen an announcement from BeyondTrust in some time. Privilege management for Windows and Mac. via SaaS offering to enhance endpoint security. Kind of an interesting take on the problem.
Dude, a properly implemented privilege management system in a domain is really hard to get by.
Yeah, we're going to talk a little bit about that with CyberArk, and I think I actually mentioned, John, that you've run into some tests basically where your goal is to get domain admin, right? But what happens when they have a PAM solution where, I need to be domain admin, I have to check out some credentials, those credentials only live for a certain amount of time, and then they're destroyed, and that really does throw a monkey wrench when you're trying to get domain admin, I bet.
Usually you're looking for a mistake, right? You're looking for a service account that you can do Kerberoasting style attacks. You're looking for a file that has user IDs and passwords for local administrator on things. And I think you were talking with Joff about this on the main show last Thursday, but Joff was testing a company that had CyberArk very well instrumented, and it was shutting them down. And they were really, really close to just saying, that's it, great report for the customer saying, hey, they're doing a great job. And Joff pulled a freaking rabbit out of his hat. But his rabbit was a mistake. It was basically, they had covered 99%. He found that 1%.
One service account that's not being, because what Adam will talk about, he'll touch on, is they do cover service accounts, knowing that attackers are going after them, right? But it's hard to have 100% coverage when you're talking about things like two-factor authentication and privilege access management, and all these things. Our systems are very complex.
And this is an important thing, and I think you should talk about it in the interview, is yes, you may find that 1%, but as a tester, if you bang your head against the 99% that is set up properly, you're setting off alerts everywhere. So it isn't about the attacker just like, haha, I hacked you. It's literally look at the amount of noise that they had to generate to get to that point, and that's the key difference.
It's a great point. Let's see. What hinders successful threat hunting? I thought this was interesting.
That SANS article.
Well, but it didn't get into so much of the technical thing. It basically said one of the struggles is I got to hire competent people with experience, and they're hard to find, which I thought was a very frank approach to it, and appreciated that.
Well, the other thing about threat hunting that's difficult, and it springboards off of this, right, is if you're doing threat hunting and you're using signatures, you're not doing threat hunting. Just stop right now. You're done. If you're doing threat hunting and you're looking for outliers, software that's only installed on a handful of systems, network connections that are weird and anomalous network connections, if you're looking at it from the perspective of outliers, you're doing it correct. But the problem is exactly like this article talked about, how hard is it to get to the point where you can look at an outlier and say, oh, that's just a driver for an old printer, versus somebody that can look at it and say, no, this is actually evil in our organization. And that still requires a high level of skill.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think, we've talked Viavi particularly and others as well about enabling folks like the help desk, junior level SOC people to identify the outliers, right? And then they're kind of like the first level filter, and then that filters up to the more experienced people who don't have to go find all the outliers, right? That's the first kind of level. They're escalating those up to say, hey, I found this, like, it looks weird, right? And then the senior person can go, yeah, we need to do more investigation or not, right?
In a goofy little backstory for active countermeasures, when Chris first joined us, Paul, he had me do a threat hunt. And he had me talk to a camera while I was doing the threat hunt and talking through what I'm thinking, why I'm doing this, what I'm looking for. And then he basically took the development direction of AI Hunter into saying, look, we can automate 85% of what John is looking for and collapse it. And it's the same concept. So any vendor that's approaching threat hunting from outlier analysis and making it easier, like you said, somebody in help desk to be able to get that 80% of the work out of the way is going to be a good vendor to be looking into.
And that's Chris's approach is absolutely spot on when we talk about security or really any other IT process, right? We know we have these processes that rely way too much on humans. I do the same thing with production. With John, I'm like, walk me through the steps of what you do, and then, taking notes, and then I go back and I'm like, we can automate 50 to 80% of this, right? And it's the same thing with threat hunting, is identifying what you can automate and what requires that human decision. Oh, I wanted to throw... go ahead, Matt. Sorry.
I was just going to say, it requires vendors to really understand what that experience looks like, which is what Chris did, right? And then you can, then now you have some of that capability. You still need some skill set, though, probably to really understand those results, to be effective with the other 15, 20%, whatever is not automated, to finish that analysis of the hunt, right? And that's where I think the SANS article gets interesting, is it's still hard to find that 15 to 20% skill set.
Agreed.
And you're right back to that problem. But, in this space right now, last week we did that Job Hunters webcast with Jason Blanchard, and he talked about how people can make themselves, better at finding jobs, right? But honestly, if you're really good at what you do and you have those skills and you can get that interview, really good network security professionals are getting snapped up very fast. And especially in this current market that we're in, there's a bunch of companies that are going out of business. They're laying off people. There's fantastic, high quality people that are just available to get pulled into programs. And if you are a solid company and you're not taking advantage of this space to hire that talent, then you're missing the boat completely.
I just wanted to throw a shout out to DigiSir. They used to advertise on the show. And, recently, as some of our listeners may have noticed, right, all of a sudden, all of our SSL certs were up, for renewal. And I got a little overwhelmed. And Marcin, our developer, and I worked through updating all of our certificates, which lived in a bunch of different places, right? Because, 2 to 4 years, right, that creeps up on you. And I renewed a cert with like 3 different providers, just, based on where it was. When I bought a new one, I went to DigiSir, and I have to say they're the best interface. They do a great background check. They made us do the extended verification checks, actually made sure we were a legitimate business and all that stuff. Some people didn't do that, right? You can always generate free certificates as well, which is a whole conversation about trust. We maybe have at a later time, right?
A lot of companies are just outright blanket shutting those down now.
Yeah. DigiSir was awesome.
And they should.
Yeah. The user experience, the whole process, I want to consolidate everything on their platform because I thought they did a really great job. And we talked about it when they were coming up for interviews, how they took over the Symantec CA business. And my estimation as a user now, just last week, is they've done a great job in just really doing, dotting the I's, crossing the T's on all the things that you want your CA provider to do and making it easy. So.
And no more certificate errors on the wiki.
We still have an intermediate certificate we're trying to get on. Yeah, and it's a glitch, and just the way I'm building the container is kind of weird. Trying to get Nginx without root privileges to run, basically, inside your container. So we'll fix that this week. Let's see. Contrast Security expands with language support for Python, which I thought was interesting.
Which means you can test it now on our app.
Right?
Yeah.
I think, with Lambda especially, a lot of applications I'm seeing when I speak with developers, even ones that are maybe traditional Java-based, a lot of them have Python components today. Which is why I think you're seeing more support from vendors like Contrast, which is awesome. I think a lot of the machine learning is done in Python rather than another language because it has the support and documentation and things like that. I also think that folks focused on AI, if they have to learn a language, a lot of them are also turning to Python. Several developers that I've spoken, several people focus on AI type stuff. When they pick up a language, it's now Python because it has great support for that.
And it has to be, right? I mean, it's just an easy language to learn. However, I will caution, if you're working on extremely large data sets, don't use Python. Use Go. The multi-threading support is in there. It's like 1,000 times faster than Python.
Yes, agreed.
And we've done some really interesting discussions on Application Security Weekly, which is on Mondays, around some of the advantages of interactive testing. Obviously, Contrast being one of the leaders in that space. It requires you to build your test cases, Paul,
right.
Which is a great way to do regression testing as part of your CI/CD pipeline to move stuff into production faster. So just some interesting conversations on ASW around IaaS for those who are interested.
Oh, and Fortinet. We've talked about Fortinet in the past couple of weeks. They finally have an article, an announcement. I think that's relevant, right? Securing your SD-WAN, which is technology we've talked about, replacing your traditional VPNs. So they have a timely announcement. Again, their technology is great, and I would definitely consider them for SD-WAN capabilities, for sure.
Yeah, this is way better than their next Gen Firewall announcement that we covered a week or two ago. Going, you're like, really? Now this is relevant. Yes.
Are you seeing, John, in your test, what's VPN looking like today?
Right now, we're struggling to make sure that every single test, when we gain access to an endpoint, making sure that that endpoint is either A, a corporate asset, or B, it is also attached to the corporate VPN. We're very, very, very concerned about landing on someone's bring your own device notebook computer, and then gaining access to a home system and a home network, and basically documenting the procedures for if that happens, how we document what we did, how we back up, how we clean it, and how we communicate it with the customer. But yeah, it's absolutely a real problem, no question.
I think that was. Go ahead.
Just Aqua Security raised another $30 million in around Series D. That was announced late Wednesday after the show last week. And the reason I brought this up, it's kind of interesting. We've seen some interesting moves in the container security space. Twistlock was acquired by Palo Alto. We talked last week about VMware buying Octarine. Aqua and Sysdig are like the last two kind of independent big players out there. There were a lot of rumors back when Layered Insight was acquired by Qualys that VMware was going to buy Aqua at some point. Well, they bought Octarine. So I'm curious, where is somebody like an Aqua Security's exit? Might be Microsoft. Microsoft's an investor. It's just going to be interesting to see how these last two kind of big container security vendors play out.
And it's so critical today. We talk about all the new cloud technologies and Kubernetes. A lot of it, as we've pointed out in technical segments, it comes down to you still have to build a secure container. And so many places don't do that well at all, especially what's open source on Docker Hub. Usually it's really bad the way they build it. And I end up rebuilding it, a more secure and better way. So I think there's a huge space for these companies to play as more things become containerized. Doesn't matter where you're putting it in Kubernetes and wherever, you still got to build that container. Cool. That rounds out the news for this week. Stay tuned. Adam Bosnian from CyberArk coming up next.